Fat obese girl heard crying in cabin. She found the lost mountain man who changed her life. The storm had swallowed the mountains whole. Wind ripped through the pines like a living thing, howling, clawing, devouring every trail and landmark, until the world became nothing but white breath and shadows. And somewhere in that merciless dark walked Temperance Wilkes, 29 years old, soaked through, shivering so violently her teeth rattled. Every step sank deep into the drifts. Every breath burned her throat. She hadn't eaten since dawn. She hadn't slept since the night she fled Blackwater with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her father had sold her like livestock to a man 3 times her age, a man whose hands were known for cruelty, not kindness. Temperance had run because she believed dying in the snow would be better than being owned. But now, stumbling through the storm, she wasn't sure death wasn't already reaching for her. Her heavy body made each step harder than the last. Snow clung to her skirt, dragged at her legs. The cold turned her fingers to stone. She whispered to herself, voice barely a breath, "Not yet. Please, not yet." Then, through the thick curtain of snow, she saw it, a faint glow, small, flickering, impossibly distant. Perhaps a lantern, perhaps her mind finally breaking under the cold. But she pushed toward it, heart thudding, closer, closer, until a shape took form. A cabin, a single room, low-roofed, crouched against the storm like a stubborn old man refusing to bow. She almost cried from relief, but another sound reached her first. A man crying, not softly, not politely. A raw, broken sound, the kind pulled from a place so deep it had no bottom. Temperance froze at the door, her breath misting in the air. A man crying in the middle of a blizzard could mean danger as easily as safety. But the desperation in that voice echoed her own too closely to ignore. She lifted a trembling hand and knocked. "Hello, sir? Please, I'm lost. I need help." No response, only that same cracked sobbing muffled by the walls. The latch gave beneath her fingers. The door swung inward. The cabin was nearly dark. The fire had gone to embers, and on the floor beside the cold hearth sat a man, huge, broad-shouldered, slumped like a fallen tree. His coat was torn, fur matted with blood. His hair hung in tangled waves. His beard was thick and wild. One leg was stretched out stiff and bandaged with ripped cloth, the snow around it stained dark red. He looked up when she stepped inside. Blue eyes met hers, glazed with pain, rimmed with tears, yet sharp enough to see every truth she tried to hide. "Who are you?" he rasped. "My name is Temperance," she whispered. "Please, I'm freezing, and you're hurt." The man tried to straighten, but his strength failed him. "Name's Caleb Stone," he murmured. "I'm not sure either of us will see morning." Temperance shut the door against the screaming wind. "Then we'll keep each other alive," she said. And for the first time in days, neither of them felt entirely alone. The storm hammered against the cabin walls as if trying to snatch the two of them back into the dark. Temperance knelt beside the hearth, coaxing the dying embers with trembling hands. She added splinters of kindling, then larger pieces of wood, blowing softly until a thin flame licked upward. Warmth spread slowly, hesitantly, as though even the fire needed courage to wake. Caleb Stone watched her through half-closed eyes. His breath came shallow, strained. His face, rugged beneath the beard, carried the gaunt look of a man who had been losing a battle long before the storm found him. "You shouldn't have come in here," he muttered. "Could be dangerous." Temperance glanced over her shoulder. "I'm too cold to be afraid, and you're bleeding through your bandages. If one of us is dangerous, sir, it isn't you." A rough, humorless sound left his throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a groan. He shifted, wincing. The cloth around his thigh was soaked through, the red nearly black. She hurried to melt snow in a battered tin kettle, then searched shelves until she found a bottle of clear liquor. When she brought it to him, he stiffened. "That'll sting," he warned. Temperance tore a piece of her already torn skirt and wetted it. "So will dying." She peeled back the old bandage. He clenched his jaw but didn't flinch. The gash was deep, ragged, the kind a bear's claw would leave. She poured the liquor over it. He sucked in a sharp breath, gripping the arm of the chair until his knuckles whitened. "You're a brave man, Mr. Stone." He gave a faint shake of his head. "Brave men don't get caught by a half-starved grizzly." Temperance finished rewrapping the wound and sat back on her heels, watching him with quiet concern. "You made it home alive. That seems brave enough." "Barely alive," he murmured, gaze drifting to the fire as if seeing a different night, a different storm. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things neither of them had said yet. She felt it was her turn to explain. "My father sold me," she said softly. Caleb turned his head, just slightly, but his eyes sharpened with something fierce. She swallowed. 3 days ago, to a man older than him, a man who—" Her voice cracked. "I ran. I didn't know where else to go. The storm caught me. I thought I was going to freeze to death until I saw your light." Caleb's jaw moved as though he were grinding down anger, not at her, never at her. A father who'd sell his own daughter, he's no father at all. Temperance wrapped her arms around herself. "I know it isn't proper to be alone with a strange man, but I didn't have a choice." "Neither did I," he said quietly. "You saved my life tonight." She blinked. "I haven't saved anything. Not yet." "You lit the fire," he said. "You stopped the bleeding. You came through that storm when most folks would have curled up and quit. That counts for more than you think." The praise stunned her. Temperance was used to whispers behind her back, to mocking looks at her size, to men turning away in disgust. But this mountain man, broken, bleeding, crying when she first arrived, looked at her as if she were solid, capable, necessary. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Why were you crying?" He closed his eyes. The lines around them deepened. "Tonight's the anniversary," he said. 10 years since I buried my wife and son. Fever took them before I could ride home from the hunt." His voice roughened. "I wasn't there to hold them. I wasn't there to say goodbye." Temperance's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry." He nodded once, but his gaze drifted again, lost somewhere beyond the cabin walls. "Since then, I've lived up here, alone, hunting, trapping, fixing this place every time the mountain tries to tear it apart. Some winters I hoped I wouldn't survive the cold. Others I fought like hell because it felt like the only thing I deserved." Temperance eased closer, warmth from the fire casting a soft glow over her round cheeks, her kind eyes. "No one deserves to grieve alone for 10 years." Caleb let out a slow, shaking breath. "And you? You said you were lost. But I don't think that's all." She hesitated, then told him the truth she'd been too ashamed to say aloud. How her father blamed her size for scaring off suitors. How he'd shouted she was worthless, a burden, good for nothing except being sold. How Temperance had believed him for far too long. Caleb looked at her with a steadiness that made her feel seen in a way she never had. "Your father is wrong. You hear me? A woman who walks through a storm to save a stranger, that's worth more than he'll ever know." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because you deserve it," he said. "Because you saved me. And because," he swallowed, "because I remember what it feels like to wish someone would say, 'I mattered.'" Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the cabin warmed. Two people who had been thrown away by the world now sat close enough for each other's breath to mingle in the cold air. And though neither spoke it, something fragile had begun to shift between them, something like trust and maybe even hope. By morning, the storm had not eased. It had grown heavier, dragging a white curtain across the valley so thick the world looked erased. The cabin groaned under the weight of snow. Wind screamed between the pines, rattling the shutters like bones in a box. Temperance woke stiff and aching from sleeping on the floor beside Caleb's chair. She pushed herself upright, brushed the frost from her skirt, and checked the fire. It had burned low again, but she fed it patiently until orange light spread across the room. Behind her, Caleb stirred and winced. Pain carved sharp lines across his rugged features. "How bad is it today?" she asked gently. He tested his leg, sucking in a breath. "Feels like a pack of wolves chewed on it during the night." Temperance moved closer. "Then you don't stand. Not until the wound closes more. I'll fetch wood, melt snow, cook breakfast." Caleb frowned. "Temperance, the drifts out there are as high as my chest, and it's 10 below freezing." She slipped on his spare coat, far too big for her round frame. "Then it's a good thing I don't plan on climbing a mountain, just a few steps to the woodpile." He reached out and caught her wrist, not tight, but enough to make her pause. "No one has taken care of me since Hannah died. You don't owe me this." She met his gaze steadily. "I told you I'd help you survive. That's not owing, that's choosing." He let her go. Outside, the cold cut her like a knife. Snow swirled waist-high and stung her eyes. But Temperance pushed through it, gathering logs, hauling them in her arms. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her skin burned. Yet every time she stepped back into the cabin, warmth and purpose caught her up like a blanket. Caleb watched her carry in the third load. "Temperance," he said, shaking his head, "you're doing enough work for 2 strong men." She brushed off the snow. "I'm stronger than I look." "I'm finding that out," he murmured. Hours passed with a strange, gentle rhythm. Temperance cooked a thin stew of salt pork and potatoes. Caleb carved a new handle for his hunting knife, his movements careful, his breath steadying each time she passed by the fire. They spoke in fragments, about freezing winters, about childhood memories, about mistakes neither wanted to name. That afternoon, as she added more broth to the pot, Temperance said quietly, "You think you'll be able to walk in a few days?" Caleb hesitated. "If the wound doesn't rot." "It won't," she said firmly, "not if we keep it clean." He studied her face. "You talk like someone who's done this before." "I took care of my little sister when she nearly died of fever," she said softly. "I've always been the one who stays awake while others sleep." Caleb's voice lowered. "And who stays awake for you?" Her hand stilled. She didn't answer. A silence settled, thick and warm, like wool. Later, near sundown, they shared a small meal by the fire. Caleb tried to eat on his own, but his hand shook too badly. Temperance moved beside him, lifting the spoon gently. He tried to protest, but she gave him a look firm enough to silence him. "I've fed calves bigger than you," she said. That coaxed the first true smile she'd seen from him. "You're a force of nature," he murmured. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm only doing what needs doing." "No," he said quietly, "you're doing more." When night fell again, the wind shifted. The storm softened to a steady hush, like a giant breathing deeply outside the walls. The fire dimmed, leaving just a pool of warm light where they sat. Caleb shifted in his chair. "Temperance?" "Yes." "You should sleep in the bed tonight." Her breath caught. "Caleb, I can't take your bed. You're injured." "I'm not asking you to share it," he said, voice gentle. "I'm asking you not to freeze on the floor. I'll manage in the chair." She hesitated. A lifetime of being told she took up too much space made her shrink away from comfort, but Caleb waited patiently, eyes steady. Reluctantly, she stood. "All right." She lay down under the thick quilt, the warmth seeping slowly into her tired bones. Caleb watched from the chair, the firelight casting shadows across his face. After a long moment, he said, "Temperance, you're safe here. No one can buy you. No one can take you." Her eyes filled, but her voice was steady. "Thank you." He nodded once, leaning his head back, closing his eyes. The wind moaned outside, softer now, almost tender. For the first time in years, Temperance drifted into sleep without fear pressing down on her. The next morning, the world outside the cabin shimmered under a soft, pale sun. The storm had emptied itself. Everything was clean, new. When Temperance helped Caleb sit up and checked his bandage, he looked at her with something deeper than gratitude, something like the beginning of trust. And though neither of them said it aloud, a truth had begun to root itself quietly between them. Two broken souls had found warmth, not by accident, but because the storm had driven them to the same door. Sunlight crept in slowly the next morning, slipping past the frost-framed window and settling in the soft gold patches across the cabin floor. The storm had cleared, leaving the world blanketed in white so pure it looked untouched since creation. Temperance stood at the threshold, staring at the still valley, snow piled against the pines like white shoulders hunched in prayer. She wrapped her borrowed coat tighter around herself, feeling the cold pinch at her cheeks. Behind her, Caleb shifted with a low groan. "Morning already?" Temperance closed the door gently. "The storm's past. It's cold, but quiet." He sat straighter in the chair, bracing himself as she approached. "Quiet's good. Means I might get through the day without a bear, a wolf, or a fool with a gun chasing me." She smiled faintly as she knelt beside him. The wound looked better, still swollen, but no longer bleeding through the cloth. She touched the edge of the bandage. "It's healing. Slowly, but healing." "Thanks to you," he said. His voice was calm, but something else flickered beneath it, something softer, warmer, unfamiliar. She felt it brush against her like heat from a lantern. Temperance eased to her feet. "I'll make breakfast. You rest." He watched her for a moment, as if he could anchor himself with the sight of her moving through the small space. She filled the room in ways her father always mocked, full-bodied, full presence. But here, in this cabin built for a solitary man, her presence made the place feel fuller, warmer, alive. She cracked the last 2 eggs into a pan, chopped the dried venison into slivers, and stirred everything together with a pinch of salt. The scent filled the room, rich, comforting, familiar, in a way that made Caleb close his eyes for just a moment. "You cook like someone who's been feeding others her whole life," he said. Temperance shrugged. "Someone had to." "Who did you care for?" "My sister Patience," she said, stirring slowly. "She was sickly. I did everything for her, cooked, washed, helped her breathe through the fevers." Her voice softened. "She died when she was 14. Caleb opened his eyes. The grief in hers was quiet, but deep as winter wells. "You carry a lot on your shoulders, Temperance." A humorless little breath escaped her. "They're broad enough." He gave a faint huff of a laugh. "That they are." She froze, a brief sting of shame rising, but then she saw his expression. No mockery, no cruel amusement, just a man speaking plainly, gently, as if acknowledging a truth without turning it into a weapon. She turned back to the pan, cheeks warming. After breakfast, Temperance began tidying. She swept the floor with the worn straw broom, humming softly. She wiped down the table, folded blankets, reorganized shelves that had long been left in disarray. Caleb watched in quiet amazement, astonished at how the simple act of cleaning could reshape a life that had grown stale around him. "This place looks different," he said, "like it remembers it's a home." Temperance paused, hands on her hips. "It is a home, Caleb, even if you've lived in it like a man waiting for winter to finish him off." He shifted, caught, but not offended. "That obvious?" She nodded gently. "A man who wants to live doesn't let the fire go cold." Something deep inside him tightened, then loosened. "Maybe I just needed someone to help tend it." Temperance swallowed. She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't try. By midday, Caleb insisted on trying to stand. Temperance was at his side instantly. "Slow," she warned. He braced on her shoulder. The warmth of her, solid, steady, surprised him. When he managed to lift himself upright, he let out a breath that trembled at the edges. "You all right?" she asked. "Better than I deserve," he said. She guided him to the bed, unwilling to let him return to the chair. "You need real rest," she whispered. He sat heavily, one hand gripping hers. Their eyes caught, hers full of worry, his full of something else entirely. "Temperance," he murmured, "you don't have to take care of me this much." "Yes," she said softly, "I do." He studied her face. She wasn't delicate. She wasn't fragile. She looked like someone made for weathering hardship. Round cheeks flushed with heat, sturdy shoulders, hands strong enough to split kindling if she needed to. But her eyes were gentle enough to soften a mountain. He cleared his throat. "You should rest, too." "I rest when I must." "You should rest when you can," he countered. She blushed faintly and stepped back. The days that followed fell into a steady rhythm. Each morning, Temperance fetched water and wood, her breath turning to frost as she trudged through the snowdrifts. Caleb's strength returned slowly. He learned to lean on crutches he crafted from pine branches. Temperance helped him dress, helped him move, helped him sit outside one mild afternoon to feel the sun on his face for the first time in weeks. When he shuddered from the cold, she tucked a blanket around him. He didn't protest. At night, they sat together by the fire. Caleb carved small wooden animals, a fox, a deer, a bear, and gave them to her without explanation. She lined them on the shelf, smiling each time she passed. One evening, as she stirred a pot of rabbit stew, Caleb's voice drifted across the room. "Temperance, can I say something without you shying away?" She paused. "You can say anything." He exhaled, steadying himself. "You saved me. But it isn't just the wound. It's the loneliness. It's the silence I've lived in so long it felt like a grave. Her eyes softened. I know that silence. He leaned forward, his voice low, almost shy. You've given me back something I thought I'd buried with my family. She approached slowly, heart thudding. And what's that? He met her gaze. Hope. The word broke something open inside her. She had lived years hearing nothing but what she lacked. Beauty, thinness, value. But now she stood in a cabin warmed by her hands, seen by a man who had nothing left to gain from lying. She whispered, Caleb, you give me hope too. He reached for her hand, not pulling, not demanding, just holding. Outside, the snow glowed blue beneath the moon, silent and unbroken. Inside, two people who thought they had lost everything found a reason to face the next dawn. The thaw came slowly. Sunlight stretched longer across the valley each day, teasing small beads of meltwater down the icicles hanging from the cabin roof. The air softened just enough that Temperance could walk to the creek without the snow biting her ankles. Life inside the little cabin grew warmer too, gentle routines forming, steady as heartbeat. But beneath that calm, something darker simmered. Temperance felt it first in the way Caleb watched the tree line whenever he stepped outside, his jaw tensing at the snap of a branch. She saw it in how he kept the rifle within reach, even while carving wooden toys or eating supper. His smile, rare and quiet, always vanished when the wind carried a distant sound. One morning, as she tightened his bandage, she asked softly, What are you afraid of? He looked away, eyes shadowed. Not afraid, just watchful. Caleb, she insisted, your body's healing, but your mind, it still fights something. He let out a long breath. The world doesn't let a man disappear just because he climbs a mountain. Temperance rested her hand on his arm. Tell me what's chasing you. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy. Finally, he spoke. I wasn't always alone. I know. You had a family. He shook his head. Before that. He leaned back, gaze fixed on the ceiling beams as if reading memories carved into the wood. When Hannah died, I broke. I needed to keep moving, keep hunting, keep choosing anything but death. But I had debts. Debts left from a mine partnership I'd tried to make work. I trusted the wrong men. His voice roughened. One of them, Ezekiel Ward, loaned money to finish the mine shaft. When the fever took my family, I walked away from everything. I couldn't work, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Ward said I abandoned the contract, said I stole what belonged to him. Temperance frowned. Did you? No, but grief makes a man careless. I didn't fight him, didn't fight anyone. His jaw tightened. Ward sent men after me, to take what little I had left, to drag me back, to make me work off the debt until the mountains swallowed me whole. Temperance felt cold ripple down her spine. And they know where your cabin is? They knew 10 years ago. They might remember. Men like Ward don't let go of grudges. Caleb met her eyes. That's why I said you might not be safe with me. She reached up and cupped his cheek before she realized what she was doing. You've been running from the world for 10 years. It's time you let someone stand beside you. He caught her wrist gently, holding her hand against his face. Temperance, I don't want you hurt because of me. I was hurt long before I found you, she whispered, and I'm stronger now. He closed his eyes, pressing his cheek into her palm as if anchoring himself to her warmth. But that peace didn't last. Late one afternoon, while Temperance fetched water at the creek, she noticed a strange set of footprints, large, heavy prints that didn't belong to Caleb. Her heart lurched. She dropped the bucket and hurried back to the cabin. Caleb was sitting near the fire when she burst in, breathless. "Someone's been here." His posture changed instantly, sharpening like a hunting dog catching scent. "Where?" "By the creek. 2 sets of tracks." He grabbed the rifle and crutches. "Get inside the bedroom. Stay low." She shook her head fiercely. "I won't hide." "Temperance? You can't face whatever this is alone." Caleb's expression warred between fear and pride. Then he nodded tightly. "Stay behind me." They waited. Minutes dragged, thick with tension. Temperance could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, loud and frantic. Caleb stood planted in front of the door, shoulders squared, rifle steady in his hands. His breath came slow, controlled. Then a knock. Sharp, purposeful, slow. Caleb's eyes hardened. "Ward's men," he whispered. Temperance felt her stomach drop. A voice outside, smooth and cold as pond ice in winter, called out, "Caleb Stone, I know you're in there." Caleb didn't respond. "Come out now," the voice continued, "and we'll talk terms. I don't want to break down your door, but I will." Temperance's hands curled into fists. She stepped closer to Caleb, her voice trembling but steady. "We face them together." He flicked a glance at her. "I won't let them take you." "They won't," she said. "Not while we stand." The door rattled under a fist. "Last chance, Stone." Caleb inhaled deeply. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Temperance moved just a half step behind his shoulder. He threw open the door. 4 men stood outside, armed, broad-shouldered, coats dusted with snow. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, smirked. "Well now," he drawled, "looks like the mountain hermit's got himself a woman." Temperance stiffened, but Caleb didn't move. "What do you want, Ward?" he said, voice low. Ward lifted a document. "Payment, with interest, 10 years overdue." Caleb shook his head. "I owe you nothing." "No?" Ward stepped forward. "Then hand over everything in this cabin and come with us. You work the mine until the debt is paid, or the lady comes instead." Temperance felt bile rise in her throat. Caleb stepped forward, blocking Ward's view of her completely. "You lay a hand on her," he said softly, "and I'll put you in the ground." Ward laughed. "You? On one good leg?" Temperance spoke before she could stop herself. "He's not the only one with strength." Ward's eyes narrowed. "Brave, aren't you?" "Stronger than you'll ever know," she said. Caleb's hand brushed against hers, just a whisper of contact, but enough to anchor him, enough to say without words, "Thank you." Ward's expression shifted. "Final offer. Come with us willingly, or we take what we want by force." Caleb raised the rifle. Temperance reached for the second rifle under the table. The air thickened, sharp and electric, braced on the edge of violence, and in that breathless moment before storm met fire, one truth settled between them. They would not surrender, not their lives, not each other. The world outside the cabin fell utterly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ward and his men stood in a crooked line in the clearing, their boots sunk deep into the snow, rifles tilted just enough to make their intentions clear. Caleb braced himself, weight uneven on the crutches but posture steady, eyes locked on the man who had haunted a decade of his life. Temperance stood behind him, close enough that her breath warmed the back of his shoulder, her hands tight around the second rifle. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her fingertips, but her grip didn't shake. Ward's smirk widened. "Well now, this is a pretty scene. The mountain hermit and his plump little angel thinking they can scare off a pack of wolves. Caleb didn't lift the rifle higher. He didn't need to. His voice carried more steel than the barrel of any gun. "Turn around. That's your last warning." Ward laughed. "Boys, he thinks he can—" The laugh died when Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the clearing like thunder, echoing off the frozen cliffs. Ward's hat flew from his head as the bullet ripped through the brim. Snow plumed around his boots as he stumbled back in shock. "You missed," Ward snarled. "No," Caleb said calmly. "I warned." Everything erupted. Ward lunged first, firing wild, his men following in a frenzy of gunfire and shouts. Caleb shoved Temperance behind the heavy pine door, stepping out into the full storm of violence with a roar ripped straight from his chest. Two of Ward's men charged from the right. Caleb fired once, dropping one. The second swung his rifle like a club, smashing into Caleb's shoulder. Caleb staggered, but didn't fall. With one rapid, desperate motion, he drove his crutch into the man's ribs, sending him flat into the snow. Ward aimed again. Temperance burst from the cabin. "Temperance, no!" She didn't listen. She couldn't. She raised her rifle the way Caleb had taught her. Breathe in, hold steady, let the weight settle. She fired low, just as he'd said. Ward howled as the bullet tore into his thigh, dropping him to one knee. The last man rushed her. Temperance stumbled backward, the rifle slipping from her hands. Caleb intercepted him, tackling him hard enough to send both men rolling across the snow. The man grabbed Caleb's wounded leg, twisting viciously. Caleb shouted in agony but didn't stop. He slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, then used his remaining strength to shove him away. The clearing fell still. Ward writhed in the snow, clutching his thigh, teeth clenched in rage. The others lay scattered, wounded, unconscious, defeated. Caleb leaned heavily on his crutch, breath ragged, face contorted with pain. Temperance ran to him, hands shaking as she touched his arm. "Caleb, Caleb, are you hurt badly?" He caught her face in both hands, forehead pressing against hers. "You should have stayed inside." "I won't ever leave you alone in a fight," she whispered fiercely. His breath trembled, not from pain, but from something deeper. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first." Ward spat blood into the snow. "This isn't over, Stone. I'll come back." Caleb stepped toward him, towering despite his injury, voice low with controlled fury. "No, you won't." For a long moment, Ward stared at him, eyes blazing with hatred. Then, realizing the fight was lost, he crawled toward the trees, dragging himself into the forest like a wounded animal. His remaining men scrambled after him. Temperance didn't breathe until they vanished among the pines. Then she finally allowed her legs to fold, sinking into the snow. Caleb dropped beside her, pulling her into his arms with a desperate tenderness as the wind quieted around them. "You're safe," he whispered, voice hoarse with relief. "You're safe, Temperance." She clung to him, shaking with leftover terror and fierce, aching love. "This cabin, this place, it's the first home I've felt in years, and you, Caleb, you're my home too." He closed his eyes, forehead resting against hers. "If you'll have me, then this cabin is yours. This life is yours. I'm yours." Inside the cabin, the fire still burned warm and bright, but neither of them moved yet, holding each other in the snow as if anchoring themselves to a promise stronger than any storm. The snow stopped falling that evening, leaving the air clear enough to see the far ridges glowing blue beneath the pale winter sun. Temperance helped Caleb back into the cabin, one arm wrapped firmly around his waist, his weight leaning heavy against her, but never enough to slow them. Each step left two sets of prints trailing from the cabin door, one steady, one uneven, but both moving forward together. Inside, the fire welcomed them with a soft, crackling warmth. Temperance guided Caleb to the bed, insisting gently when he tried to protest. "You need to rest," she said, brushing snow from his hair. "You fought like a devil out there," he murmured, sinking into the mattress with a wince. "Strongest woman I've ever seen." She flushed, looking away as she stirred the embers. "I just did what needed doing." Caleb shook his head. "No, you did more than that." She turned, uncertain. "What do you mean?" "You chose me," he said quietly, "when you could have run, when you had every reason to save only yourself." His gaze held hers with a weight that made her breath catch. "I've lived 10 years thinking no one would ever stand with me again. Then you walked into this cabin and lit a fire I thought was gone forever." Temperance sat beside him on the edge of the bed. The quilt dipped beneath her weight, and he reached out, brushing her hand with tentative fingers as if asking permission to hope. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "Caleb," she whispered, "I didn't just stumble into your life. I found you because I needed a place to belong, and you needed someone to remind you what it feels like to be cared for." A soft sound escaped him, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, something raw, humble, grateful. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. Outside, the snowfields glowed in the gathering dusk. Inside, the fire bathed the cabin walls in warm amber light. Temperance leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He shifted, making room, his arm folding around her as naturally as if he'd done it 100 times. After a long, quiet moment, he spoke. "Temperance, you're safe here." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear, but relief. "And this is my home now," she whispered, "if you still want me here." He exhaled, a shuddered breath that carried years of loneliness slipping away. "I want you here more than I've wanted anything in a long, long time." They sat together in the glow of the fire, two souls who had braved storms, chased away darkness, and found warmth in the broken places. But outside, the world remained wide, wild and watching. And as the flames flickered across their joined hands, one question hung softly in the quiet air. Would love be enough to shield them from whatever waited beyond those snow-draped trees? Stories like this have a way of finding people who need them most. Maybe you're listening from a warm room, maybe from a long road, maybe from a place that feels a little too quiet tonight. Wherever you are, thank you for sitting beside Temperance and Caleb through the storm. Every time you share where you're listening from, it reminds me how far stories can travel, how they gather strangers around the same fire. So tell me, where in the world are you hearing this from? And if you still believe love can grow in the coldest winter, stay close. The next story is waiting for you.